So now I start in the first panel. I call Mr. Emanuele Grimaldi, who is, among the other things, the Vice President of the ICS, the International Chamber of Shipping. Mr. Panos Laskaridis, who is the President of the European Owners. Mr. John Lyras, who has served in both these roles and was also the president of the Greek ship owners, and the standing president of Confitarma, Italian Ship Owners Association, Mario Mattioli. These so-called ship owners, please sit at the center of the places. Yeah, at the center. The four of you, yes, please. As you wish, yeah. And we have two excellent journalists, also prima donne, who are Terry Macalister, former environmental editor of the Guardian, and now editor of Tradewinds, and David Osler is editor of Lloyd's List, probably the oldest newspapers in the shipping world. So I leave them the lead of this panel. You have on your program the topics, and we will try to regain part of the time lost. Yes, a bit more if you. Yes.
So, thank you very much indeed. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. I was here last year. It's a gorgeous city. It's always a wonderful physical environment. For an event to be opened by a song is enormously pleasurable compared to most conferences that I've ever attended. And Francesco always organizes a very interesting group of people and subjects to be discussed. And we heard very graphically just there from Mr. Camporini and from the president who was here about the challenges that face us all. And indeed, the future is now. There is no fantasizing about what may happen in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. The speed of political and economic change is very extreme, and we're going through a very turbulent period, and many people feel very disjointed by this, never mind these ship owners in particular, who are tasked with making investment decisions that really can't be done on the basis of what happens now or in the next 12 months. They've really got to look longer term. So I greatly enjoy being a political and economic commentator. Yes, I'm a Tradewinds columnist. I'm a former Guardian journalist. I'm also involved with Wolfson College, Cambridge. And I've got the luxury of sitting and watching this extraordinary period unfold without actually having to take decisions and ultimately responsibility for investment and other people's lives, which is what we're talking about in terms of employment and other things. So last year when we were here, we looked at various kind of very big topics. We looked at the beginning of protectionism and the era of Donald Trump, and we wondered whether it could lead to a trade war with China. Now we know it can. We also looked at whether this Belt and Road policy from China, we knew it could lead to tensions with the rest of the world. Now we know it can. Malaysia has just cancelled 3 enormous Chinese contracts. And we wondered whether the US departure from the Paris Climate Change Agreement would slow the International Maritime Organization in terms of its progress on carbon emissions. It has not. And these are new circumstances that we're here 12 months later to discuss. Francesco's introduced our guests, which we don't really need introducing because they're household names and the most senior officials and representatives of the shipping industry, and I feel very privileged to have such an extraordinary panel with me. We heard from the President about his desire to rebuild the Italian maritime industry, and we seem to get a very, very strong endorsement from him that it was very important to him. So I wondered perhaps, as we're now in Naples and we're now in Italy, whether we could just have a reaction to that. How much is the national picture more important possibly than the international picture? Could we just, would you mind just going through, giving your initial thoughts on that? Will there be a tension between national protectionism possibly, or just national pride or investment, and the international scene? Where does that leave Italy in terms of the European Union, for instance? John, would you mind kicking off?
Yes, good morning to everybody. You want to talk about Greece or about... Sorry. Okay. Do you want me to talk about Greece or about Italy? Because I don't think I'm qualified talking about the Italian situation.
I'm very happy for you to talk, John, about Greece, as to give us a contrast in terms of, say, Greek national interest versus European interest, global interest.
Well, I think that since the European Union, or the European, as it was, the EEC at the time, was founded, there's been this, if you like, tension between national policies and national aspirations and what Europe envisaged. And I have to say that in the early days of the EEC, there was more vision. There was more vision by not only the Commission and the President of the Commission, there was also more vision by the politicians that were heading the member states, which, if I recall, they were, when we joined as a country in '81, it was 12 countries, which is much less than the 28 that we have today. And obviously, in a continent like Europe, where wars have been the order of the day since the time of Christ, it's, I think, one of the achievements, on the one hand, of the European Union, that we haven't had a war since the Second Great War of the last century, but also the sort of historical situation and the historical tradition of each country has not disappeared, and this is, I think, a good thing, a very good thing. And sitting in this hall, I think it's something that we can appreciate directly. But at the same time, it makes it more difficult for 28 countries to get together and to formulate policies that everybody can support and everybody can promote and agree on. So that's the general picture, in my opinion, as far as the European Union is concerned, and what we heard before about its inability, perhaps today, to play the role that it should in the world, given that we are a very populous continent. I think 500 million or nearly 600 million, whatever it is right now, which is more than Russia and more than the United States. So on the other hand, as a shipping entrepreneur, we've always been internationalists in Greece. We've never had a national perspective. We've always been trying to be competitive. That's the first and foremost consideration. in order to exist in this business internationally. And I think it's a great achievement that the Europeans still control 40% of the world fleet. And therefore, we do not carry cargoes that are destined for Europe or that are originating in Europe. We are, and our industry in particular, is a cross-trading fleet, which means that we carry cargoes between third countries, mainly. And at the moment, it's the Far East, because of China, that is the main destination of our ships. And it used to be Japan after the Second World War, and Europe too, but now it seems to be that China is obviously the most dynamic economy, and therefore our ships are basically going into China. So to conclude, in my opinion, you know, we've always been internationalists as a Greek industry and as a Greek sector. We have to remain international. And what we want from the European Union is an understanding of what we do, an understanding of its importance, both strategically, commercially, in terms of employment, in terms of value added, in terms of culture even. And therefore, which is, I think, something that in my career I haven't seen to the extent that it should be there, this kind of support and understanding for our industry.
Thank you very much, John. Emmanuel, you're perfectly placed to give us a truly Italian perspective on this. What's your feeling about those tensions between the... Is the microphone not working? Now it is. So I was going to call on Emmanuel here to tell us about the particular tensions around Italy. I mean, do you see, quite bluntly, the new Italian, more nationalistic government as something that will be helpful to ship owners, or something that could be a more complicated relationship for you?
First of all, I agree with my friend John that our business is by definition an international business. The ships, either Italian or with other flags, they are going around the world. Of course, there is the cabotage, which is national. That applies, of course, to Greece and to Italy, but it is only a modest, very modest part of the international seafarer business. First of all, I would like also to reassure our President of the Parliament that the Italians have in Europe the biggest crew that we have in Europe, and employed. So the biggest employed crew and number of seafarers working on, whilst our fleet is not the biggest fleet of Europe, it is, I think, only the fourth. But I want to reiterate that we have the biggest, so this international registry is a full success. And for instance, in my company, out of 15,000 employees, 13,000 are European. Also, I want to reassure that even the non-European, which are working on board of the ship, have nothing to do with slavery and the rubbish that we hear sometimes from some people. There is an international, the ITF union, which is taking very good care also of the Filipino, of the Indians, and the state controls, the port controls, the controls from ITF. There are several controls to make sure that the people are well taken care on board of all the ships around the world. And I would even say that if you put the salary and the conditions on board, for instance, of the Italian ship for the Filipino, they are in proportion to the cost of living of the nation. They are much better for the Filipino than for our seafarers. Actually, the seafarers' salary are much higher than the professor of university or some of the most important people working in their own country. So the seafarers, after a period that they work, they can build a very rich business in their own country. They can deliver. But said this, going back to the international trades, I think that since 2008, we had a sort of crisis that has hit the whole world, and since then, there hasn't been a real strong recovery in shipping. And the last good year was perhaps the first half of 2008. Since then, there are some signs that in certain business there is some sort of recovery, but the business has been very hard. And of course, the Italians were not immune from this crisis, and we had some casualties of some extremely important family business that went through for centuries, for generations in Italy. So it is very sad to see this. But perhaps this had to do also with a little bit of overexposition that was there during the period of the bonanza, because the bonanza that preceded this crisis was extremely also very good. So today, the Italian business is still prospering. I think that we have some very important ship owners operating in different sectors of the business. We have cruises, we have ferries, we have tankers, bulkers, service in the shipping industry. So I would say that, but also we have my colleague, the president of Confitarma, who can speak about this. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Panos, you represent the European community ship owners. What's your feeling about this? I know you're a great critic of the European community or Commission in terms of a lot of its shipping policies and that it doesn't move as fast as you want. But is there a greater threat arising now from possibly even the breakup of the European, well, obviously there is a breakup in terms of Brexit heading this way, but there's also these nationalist policies in Italy and elsewhere. Which is the big threat now for ship owners?
Thank you, Terry. We are not dissimilar to politicians ourselves. You ask us one question, we reply to something completely different. But I would like to pick up on where you left the first series of the questions, and also Mr. Camporini, and speak a little bit generally about Europe. Europe is in a difficult situation today. We all know that. It has to engage with a lot of different and difficult questions and challenges. There is the problem of the acrimonies across the Atlantic on the trade wars. There is the question of the internal strife about the issue of the of the refugees. There is an issue between the financially strong countries and the financially weak countries. And Europe has not managed so far, and the General has pointed out this before, it does not have today developed a common foreign policy. It has not developed a common defense policy, and it does not even have developed a common internal financial policy. So it has all these problems, and there are so many things it does not have. And therefore, as we all know, he who has nothing basically is nothing. So the only strategic weapon, the only asset, strategic asset of great importance which Europe has today is what? It's its huge commercial fleet. It's a huge fleet which carries more than 40% of the world trade. It is therefore extremely important for the conducting of the international trade, the welfare of all the nations. It gives it a very great strategic value, and is basically the only thing that Europe as a collective unit can pride itself about. But what do we have? You mentioned that I am a critic of the European institutions and the European politicians. I am a strong critic on certain areas, not in all areas. There are issues and there are challenges, and maybe later we can speak a little bit about them, in which we see eye to eye with the European Commission and the European Parliament. The issue of digitalization, the issue of the competitiveness of the European flag, the issue of the single European window and better regulation, a whole array of things. But there are also other issues where we see completely differently at things. The main and basic issue on which we see differently is that, as my friends and colleagues have mentioned before, shipping is an international business, it needs international rules. We are totally against regional regulations, as is the style and the preference of the Europeans to most of the times jump start the gun and run more quickly and more aggressively than the world can actually absorb. We are fully in favor of international solutions, and there is only one regulator worldwide accepted, which is the IMO, and therefore we don't need other regional regulators whom we respect, as we respect the Commission, as they are our European regulators, but they should not jump the gun and try to go faster than the international scene can follow. But most of all, picking up on what I said before, and given the fact that the European fleet is Europe's strongest political and strategic asset, we want them to raise the finger at shipping. We want them to raise the finger at what we do and think that and accuse shipping of everything evil in the world. We want them to stand behind us. We want them to protect us. We want them to support us, not to be against us. Unless they want, in 10 or 15 years, to see all of the Europe's trade and most of the world's trade carried by ships built in China, operated by China, manned by Chinese crews, and their business being run out of the Far East. This they must realize. We must not repeat as Europeans the mistake which we made 25 years ago, when the European policies destroyed the European shipbuilding industry and sent it wholesale to the Far East. So these are a few of the challenges we have and a few of the worries we have, and we can continue in the next round. Thank you.
Last time we spoke, you had just been elected to your position in charge of the Italian Shipowners Association, but you hadn't actually taken control. Now you're in the driving seat and your feet are under the table. What's your feeling? Is the new Italian government friend or foe to shipping?
I have met recently the Minister for Transportation. He will be attending to our general meeting that will be on the 31st of October in Rome. And I have to say that the first meeting has been, in my opinion, quite positive, in the sense that it has been institutionally perfect. What I say is no mobile phone or smartphone ringing, nobody was looking on a screen of other stuff like that. It has been a pure 45 to 50 minutes deeply concentrated on that. The two things that I have expressed as, of course, a sort of worry that there is in our association is the first one is, as everybody was saying, that in the last 20 years we have been doubling the number of tonnage under the Italian flag and more than doubling the occupation. And when I say occupation, as Manuel was saying before, is of a European community and Italian occupation on board of our ship. So this instrument has been the International Register, and further on in 2004 the tonnage tax scheme. This came out under, of course, European rule, so it's not been invented by Italy, but it's been applied by Italy, and I have to say we have been the last to apply these possibilities that were available since the end of the 80s. So the first thing is this has been a very strong instrument that has created occupation, has created investment, has basically given to the Italian companies the competitiveness that it is absolutely crucial in our business. We are competing in the world, we are competing with the world, we are not regional, but we are global, and if we have a structure that is not competitive with structures of other countries, we are losing the game, full stop. So this is a very, very important matter that has to continue as it is, as well as the tonnage tax scheme. So these are the two things that I've been asking to keep a model that has been a successful model over the last 20 years, and we hope for the next 20 years at least. This is the first thing. The second thing is very much linked to what was said before, that is environment. I mean, in Italy, and this is something that I have told to the press, but I've told to the relevant people, we are treated not in the right way as shipping transportation. I mean Italy. In the environmental minister, we are classified as dangerous subsidies to the environment, meaning the schemes that I said before, international register plus tonnage tax, is seen as a subsidy to the industry, and this subsidy has to have an advantage from an environmental point of view. Unfortunately, under our environmental department, we are dangerous. Why? Just because we have increased the emission as Italian flag. But we have doubled the fleet, we have doubled the occupation. Of course, in absolute terms, if one vessel is, has some emission, two vessels have the double, or more or less the double, even with all the... So the wrong thing is this one. We have always been taught, and as has been said, that shipping is the most environmental way of transportation per unit transported, by far. First of all, we transport 90% of the goods all over the world. Secondly, it is by far the less polluting in general. Of course, this is not possible that the Italian fleet is seen as dangerous to the environment because there is a shortcut somewhere that one has to explain. So these are the two issues very, very strong that have been said. Because one of the things is that because the environmental ministry department sees us as dangerous, they cut the possibility of continuing as it is the international register, means that the Italian fleet, for the vast majority, is going to disappear as Italian, not to disappear as a fleet. This is a general statement. And on these, I have to say that the minister has been extremely, he has understood, of course, all the matters, and he has been very reassuring in his speech, in the sense that he said what has been done good in the past has not to be destroyed. So we've taken these, and I hope that this will be then, let's say, will be a full statement to our... these are the two things that I've said, and I hope that as it is now, I am very positive.
Thank you very much indeed. David?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question about the future in terms of investment and what Shipowners' plans are. And of course, if you're going to invest, you need the money to invest. Now, I think the situation facing Italy and the situation facing Greece is very different. So I'll ask the question in two parts, maybe starting with our Italian friend first. Many business people will read the Financial Times or the equivalent newspaper in their own countries, and the news we get about the Italian economy, about the Italian banking system is often quite alarming. So how do you see your financial future? Do you think that you'll be able to secure the money that you need, and where do you think you can get it from? Italian banks, the Far East? I'll start with the Italians.
I think that for sound companies today, it's not at all a problem to find sufficient resources. We are now investing over 1 billion euro on 20 ships, and we are receiving funds often below 1%. So we are paying less interest than perhaps some of sovereign states are receiving. So it is not a problem at all. I was also yesterday offered by one important Italian bank 500 million on a blank card to use them as I wish, perhaps to buy some companies or other things. So I think provided the company is in good state and is operating well and has also important equity, good result, and mainly is innovative, mainly is working on research, on development, because I think this is, you must have a project behind the investment that you are making. Our ships of the future, they, for instance, we were talking before, my colleague Mario was talking about environmental regulations. This today is the biggest issue in the agenda. And I agree with Mr. Camporini. It is today that we have to act. And it is a big mistake to see everything that it is happening or a bit unpredictable like a black swan. Perhaps it was the problem was that we were not able to predict. We have to understand better the world dynamics, what it is happening, and also what can we address. And also when we are making new vessels, we have to make sure that both productivity and consumption of the new vessels are much better than the one that we are scrapping. Because when we are scrapping certain vessels, today perhaps we can build ships that are 100% more environmental friendly, that are 100% more with a higher productivity, more efficient. And this, of course, it's the progress. Perhaps the best word to call this is progress. And we are moving in this direction. Thank you.
Yeah, it is a good question, and if I have to answer, I mean, more in general, as let's say the chairman of the Shipowner Association, I think that we have to look at it in a more broad way, of course. And there is in Italy, not only in Italy, problems arising with the normal shipping, of course. We all know that there's been a big crisis that is not yet ended, affecting mainly the tram business, liquid bulk or bulk itself. So this is something not only in Italy, but has happened all over the world. The reaction of the Italian banking system, if you like, has been a little bit slower than what has happened also in other legislations, because we have seen effects of trying to, let's say, come out of loans, mainly in Germany and the UK, just before that what has happened in Italy. So I think that overall the Italian banking system at the end has given a sort of help, at least for time being, to the Italian company, better than other legislations. Of course, there is a big problem nowadays. A big problem is, first of all, the European rules on banking side. Second of all, that is all the reserves that banks have to do under loans that are non-performing, and especially coming out to certain sector, like unfortunately shipping is. And least but not last is the cost of the funding to the banks, in the sense that in order to help and in order to try to give breath to the companies, we have seen that the margins applied are very limited, and now we know that many banks are losing money even on positive spreads. So these are three factors that have to be considered, unfortunately. And what we have done as a Shipowner Association, in the interest of everybody, is to have a full, but just before, much before my presidency, I've inherited all these things. I'm trying to follow the the good example of course, of the past, of the recent past. It has been to have an open dialogue with the Association of the Banks, that in Italy is called ABI, Association of Italian Banks, and as well as we have table with the investors that are not bankers, trying to open a dialogue and to have less hostility, less hostile actions within Italy, and try to do things that may recover the companies and keep on the Italian territory, as well as keeping the occupation that, especially in south of Italy, is extremely important. Thank you.
And now to ask a similar question of our Greek friends on the panel, but I sort of have the impression that Greece or Greek shipping has been a lucky country in the last 10 years, certainly compared to Italy, certainly compared to Germany or the Netherlands. Can you still get money that you need? And how come you're so lucky?
Why don't you ask Panos first?
Well, the first answer is that there is a famous proverb saying, luck beats brains anytime. So if you are lucky, you get somewhere. But please remember that in Greece, Greek shipping basically has nothing to do with Greece itself. So it is not affected by whether Greece does well or bad, and Greece has done consistently bad over the last 10 years. For those of us who do have good and solid companies, and we are looking at international financing, indeed, there is no problem. You can get financing for whatever you want to do. Of course, the current circumstances are not so favorable for smaller owners who have seen a lot of banks disappearing. Some of the larger groups have also seen that these days it is very difficult to lay easily your hands on public money, something that was very, very common in years past, so this has disappeared. For the big companies, it has partly been substituted by the rapid increase of Far Eastern Chinese, especially, financing, be it either directly or through leasing schemes. So overall, I would say the large companies do not have a problem, the smaller companies have to struggle. Just to finish off with a comment going back to the environmental things. And things are moving quickly and we don't have too much time to develop very elaborated thoughts. We are now in a completely dog bites tail situation. We are going forward, pushing the can in front of us, and we are setting both real but also aspirational targets, which we all know are extremely difficult, if not impossible, to meet. The target of 50% in 2050, which was a compromise, as we all know, between more conservative targets but also much more aggressive targets, like were the targets of the European Commission and the European Union, which were speaking about 70% by 2060 or 100% by 2060. We all know that it is impossible to achieve these targets. Please remember that these percentages are relating to 2008 baseline, and it is impossible to achieve this unless we invent a carbon-free fuel. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that I want to make the distinction, and it's quite a coincidence, or maybe it isn't, that the panel here represents what I call proprietary shipping. And for the young and younger people in the audience, I think it's important to state one of the features of a proprietary enterprise in shipping, which is that the person who runs the business and the person who owns it are the same person. And this is very true still today, overwhelmingly in the bulk sector, which is where the Greek shipping industry is involved mainly. We are private companies, I would say. Hardly any of us are quoted on stock exchange. So it's a private company situation, where, as I say, it's the person that is running it that is the company, and that is the, if you like, person whose track record and whose business is judged when it comes to financing. This is not the case, for instance, with quoted companies. As you know, you have a chief executive officer, you have shareholders who may not even know what the company does, etc., etc. So I want to stress this, because it's one of the gripes I have also with the European Union and with a lot of institutions these days, that this model has been very successful. And I take a bit of, defer from what was said about us being lucky. It's not just luck. As Pano said, it's nice to be lucky too. But in effect, in our sector, I think it's the proprietary model and the fact that we are on the ball and hands-on operators that has made the difference. And in that respect, I have to say that it is becoming more difficult to obtain financing because that is not recognized. It's not recognized institutionally by the BAL rules. So you don't get, officially at least, any credit for being in the business for 4 generations like my family has been, and for the fact that you operate a variety of vessels in a variety of markets. And this changes. People are not inclined to like change in the financial institutions these days. So they want predictability, which is not the case in bulk shipping. You can't have predictability. So track record and the proprietary model, where you, in a sense, and I don't mean this in an arrogant way, are the company. We're not brands. When we are brands like Grimaldi and Laskaridis, it's their name, it's their family. And this is something that is perhaps not as well recognized and not as familiar to the decision makers as it used to be in the past. Also in Europe, as was stated, it hasn't helped that the Germans got in such a mess with their shipping industry. It affects everybody in terms of obtaining finance, which is why it has become more difficult, unless you're big and a very good name, to obtain commercial bank financing, which is what we use in the bulk sector primarily. And this breach, if you like, or rather this gap, has been filled to a large extent by the Far East, again, which is not the best situation, but a lot of Greek owners, to conclude, are getting financing from the Far East these days.
Thank you very much. Hello? Thank you very much indeed. I mean, any one of those comments, utterly fascinating, and we could spend the whole morning, quite honestly, exploring them, particularly the last one, John, you make about the increasingly lack of familiarity between policymakers and the traditional proprietorial family-based shipping groups. But given we've got very limited time, we've got 10 minutes before coffee, and I don't want to keep people waiting. I don't want to run out of time. I know everyone will have other events or just need a coffee to go to, so I'm going to stick to the original timetable. So we've got 10 minutes, many questions we could explore, but very, very quick answers to just this big question at the moment, which has come up. We saw a very big correction on Wall Street last week. There's been an IMF meeting in Indonesia over the weekend. A lot of concern about the global economy, which has been doing pretty well, but you've seen these huge jitters in the stock market. The Economist magazine this week is that the cover is recession. How bad will it be? And what's your feeling, if we can be very brief? Are we on the verge of another recession? And if so, how strong is the shipping industry to deal with this? Has it recovered fully from 2008, or is it weaker than it was? Or do you think this is overblown and this is just something that will blow through the system? Very briefly, if I could, and I'll start with Mario at the end, and we'll just run along if we may. Thanks.
Yeah. No, I think overall there is, for sure, we are in a world that has changed and is changing very, very fast, and so all the, let's say, everything is gonna change. So we have to look at it in a very proactive way. What I can say is that shipping is moving 90% of the goods around the sea. There is a big improvement overall in terms of volumes that have been transported. There is a lot of attention to all the items that we have seen. So I think that at the moment, for sure, shipping will be still a big player of the world trades in terms of exchanges. It is changing, as has been said. There are a lot of concentrations. There are always less companies are targeted to be the real dominant companies in the world. So this is something that we have to look at very carefully, the concentration time. I think that shipping will continue to be a big player, but with some changes that we have to see and look at different methods, like trying to incentivize the aggregations of smaller companies.
Thank you. I think we know from history that the height of the freight markets does not coincide with the well-being of the world economy. They normally are there is some phase difference between them. So right now I don't think there are sufficiently strong grounds to doubt that the freight markets are probably looking up with a confidence. So I'm not too worried. I'm not too worried about this. The world economy is still doing quite well. I think the trade war issues affect only a very small percentage of the world trade, and indeed this is the case. And I'm not sure this will escalate much more. So overall, I'm concerned, but I'm not too worried.
I think three of the main issues in Italy and in the world are: one is the new poverty, second is migration, and third is world commerce. Poverty, I'm very happy to hear that the actual government is taking care for dignity of the people and increasing the minimum pension and taking care of the poor people. This has to do also with your answer, because this will fight also stagnation in our own country, and because this money will be spent, and this will help also the commerce in our country. Then we have migration. Migration, our two countries, Italy and Greece, were hit very, very hard by migration. What happened? The rest of Europe were trying to dictate what to do to us, but they left us alone, and they have been very hypocrite on the issue, because they told us what to do, but they didn't do their own homework in their own countries. And then we have the commerce. Now, I think that General Camporini said it very nice, that perhaps in a very unpolite way, the President of the United States is trying to address this issue. But it is possible. I ask myself, and I know the answer. The answer is not. It is possible that a state has an imbalance with other states, very chronic, growing, and for so many years. And particularly if this money is not raising the standard of living of the country that has the positive balance, but it is also only used to buy the other countries. Is this possible? So even if it is done in a very unpolite way, some of the issues that the President of the United States is trying to address, they have a fundament. They have right fundament. Because it cannot be that the United States forever will have this chronic imbalance that will grow forever. So, and the intellectual property also is an issue. You cannot invent something and the day after somebody is dismantling and copying what you are doing, after you have spent millions or billions in research and development. All this has to be taken care. And today, I think that the situation will not be as bad as, but perhaps he is trying, and we are trying to address some of the very difficult issues, but they had to be addressed sometime. Otherwise, it would have created perhaps even bigger problems in the future.
Yes, I'm going to start with a sort of more geopolitical point, which is that after the Second World War, which effectively the US won, even though the UK bore the brunt of the war, the Americans, because they were federalists, did not want to return to colonial-style trade, which is why immediately after the war, the access to trades worldwide became possible, and why the Liberian and Panama registries were set up, and why the Greek fleet, which at the time was not in Greece, and we were based in London, in the US, and everywhere, used these registers. And I mention this because a lot of people think that, open registries are these tax havens where fly-by-night owners register their ships. These were registers that were set up after the Second World War because the Americans did not want to return to a colonial regime in world seaborne trade. So seaborne trade has been open and accessible since then for everybody, barring cargo reservation or flag discrimination policies that have occurred over the years since then. So, in my opinion, and this is the fact, shipping has been growing because trade has been growing. Even during the worst recessions, I don't think we ever had, or maybe we had for 1 year, an actual drop, absolute drop in trade, in the trade volumes. And obviously, if the population of the planet is growing, trade is going to be increasing. So shipping is going to be increasing. The question is, who is going to be doing it? And this is where I believe globalization is showing signs of being a system that perhaps has exhausted itself. Because if we want, and that's a problem, because globalization has helped the trade and has helped the increase in trade and has helped, if you like, Western shipping. So going forward, the question is that if we return to a more bilateral, as was mentioned this morning, system of trading, then this, first of all, may slow down the amount of trade, and secondly, it may mean that Western shipping is not going to be as prominent as it has been so far.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. So we'll break for coffee now. Thank you so much, all the panel members, for participating so fully. And one thing you can always appreciate about ship owners is they speak their minds, and I'm always grateful to that above absolutely everything. But thank you too for sitting through this, and hopefully we learnt something. Everybody felt they've got something to take away and discuss further.
So if I may, there is, thank you very much for this very interesting panel. We have another one once we have seen the proposals that the science and the industry is giving to this new change and challenges just after the very light lunch. We should regain time, but I think there is a very short address of the most senior Italian shipowner, Peppino D'Amato, that he would like to do in the presence of the President of the House of Representatives. And then this section will be concluded by our host, who is Padre Angelo Palumbo, who would just make a very short address. So I would ask Mr. D'Amato to tell us what he intends to tell us.
Dunque, io sono il decano degli armatori campani e il vice decano nazionale, perché prima di me c'è solamente il carissimo Aldo Grimaldi. Quindi io vorrei parlarvi un po' di quello che già ha accennato il presidente Grimaldi, della grave crisi che attraversano specialmente le navi da carico secco, le BAC. Ora, una decina di anni fa, le Panamax facevano come nolo quasi $50.000 al giorno e le banche venivano a fare la fila da noi e da tutti gli altri armatori che costruivano navi da carico secco per finanziarli. Pensate che il minimo che venne ceduto per il finanziamento ammontava all'80%, minimo. Ora, a seguito di questo fatto, abbiamo i soldi, abbiamo i noleggiatori importanti. Il mio gruppo, che era composto da me e da altri 2 fratelli, costruimmo più di 30 navi. Ora, il mercato poi crollò. Naturalmente sparirono i noleggiatori e noi ci trovammo di fronte alle banche che non potevamo più pagare quello che noi potevamo avere se i noleggiatori non scomparivano. Allora, adesso stanno cercando di vendere i loro crediti a dei fondi che purtroppo non sono in gran parte persone per bene e ci va a finire nelle mani di alcuni fonti. Sicuramente deve chiudere l'azienda, quindi con conseguente occupazione. Dal calcolo che ho fatto io, da quando è iniziata questa crisi, sono state vendute oltre 100 navi. La stazza lorda di queste navi va da 40 a 50.000 tonnellate, per cui è scomparso oltre il quarto della flotta nazionale, capite? Ma questa è una cosa molto grave. È scomparso oltre il quarto della flotta nazionale. Quindi io prego veramente il Presidente Fico di farci parlare con il Ministro, assieme al Presidente Mattioli, perché è una cosa gravissima per l'Italia. Pensate, oltre alle navi, le aziende che falliscono, i disoccupati che ci sono per questa faccenda qua, perché onestamente il governo fino a questo momento non si è molto interessato di questa faccenda. Pensate che il ministro Salvini su internet ha messo il suo sito della sua segreteria, dice chi vuole interpellarmi lo può fare e io rispondo. Ne ho fatto diversi di messaggi e non ha mai risposto. Evidentemente non si rendono conto di quella che è la crisi. Presidente, guarda, tu lo sai meglio di me perché tu, ringraziato Dio, non sei coinvolto in questo settore, però questo settore scomparirà completamente, che significa più della metà della flotta nazionale. Perché non solo quelli che sono in difficoltà, che sono falliti, ma anche le importantissime ditte che hanno barche e cisterne stanno vendendo le proprie navi per far soldi. Noi ne abbiamo vendute tutte le navi che potevamo vendere, perché naturalmente quelle che abbiamo costruito le possiamo vendere perché valgono meno del finanziamento delle banche. Quindi io prego il Presidente Fico di fissarci un appuntamento con il Ministro, a me e al Presidente Mattioli, il Presidente della Confidarma, perché questo gravissimo problema venga finalmente preso in considerazione. Siamo promette, Presidente? La ringrazio molto.
Io ringrazio il comandante D'Amato che è un esempio di coraggio e di perseveranza e lo fa tutti i giorni, posso dirlo, mi sono dimenticato di farti gli auguri per il tuo compleanno, ma da qualche giorno fa ha compiuto 92 anni and he comes every day to the office. And he lives quite far, not really in Naples, but in Torre del Greco. So I think with your strength and your courage and perhaps some solutions could be found in order to preserve this very important asset for the country that is not only the iron, but first of all the people. I would like to close this session with our host, Padre Angelo Palumbo, who is the guardian of this monumental complex and of the Basilica, who just want to say a few words from the palco. Oh, from the podium.
First of all, thank you very much for your coming here. I'm very happy for Roberto Fico. He has been so good to come with us. And certainly I'm not so clever to understand all the meaning of what has been said here, I know. But what I would like to say two things. First of all, to all of you, peace and goodness. That is the wish or the greetings of all our Franciscan Father. Second point, I'd like to remind you, St. Francis is not just the holy man that was loving the animals. No, it was something else. You remember the time of crusade. Francis went to Egypt in that crusade. He went to speak to Christian chiefs and commanders of the army, told them that is not the way of helping anybody. And also he told them, you are going to be defeated. In fact, it happened, they were defeated. But after Francis, against the will of this commander, Christian commander, he went to speak directly to Saladin, Muslim commander, and they understood each other. What I'm saying, it's good to hear what you said, everything, but I remember what said also Mr. Lauro, humanity behind. That's why I say, all the best. Don't look too much so economy. Look for the well-being, all humanity, Italy and all the country. Thank you very much for coming here.